Hello and welcome to lesson 32 of the Learning Guitar series. In this particular lesson we're going to look at the shape of A7 and from a Mixolydian point of view in terms of scales, and then of course the chords and the arpeggios that go with it. First of all, let's talk about the logic behind the shape. I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with A major, open chord. And in order to have A7 as a chord, we know we can, for example, drop the A note to a G, so to an empty string, and this is A7, and we can reinforce it with an extra G on top, and this is still A7 as a chord. If I take the entire shape, finger shape, I place an imaginary barré at fret 0, and I start transposing it as usual, I can obtain all the rest of the keys. That's why we call it a shape. Hence, this is B flat 7, this is B7, C7, C sharp, D7, and of course, again, I can add the extra flat 7 on top if I want a stronger flat 7 sound. E flat 7, E7, F7, F sharp, G7, G sharp 7, and I'm back to A7. So, and that's why we call it a shape as opposed to a chord. It's a chord depending on where I fret it on the neck. In terms of reference, the root note is on the second string. In fact, you know, when we're playing A7, we're using the second string as a bass. So this is B flat, B, C, C sharp. This is all on the second string, and that's a good visual reference for your photographic memory. So for example, this is D, this is D7, this note is G, this is G7, this note is F, this note is C, and this is C7. As usual, this lesson comes with a couple of PDFs. I'll show them to you. First of all, you have scale-related studies. In this case, again, we're staying in the key of G. In terms of the shape, again, we're dealing with a scale that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. And we have the scale, and of course the Ionian. I don't think at this point I have to explain you again why G7 and C Ionian is the same notes. As usual, you have all the arpeggios. I'm going to show them to you in a second. 1 octave, 2 octaves. The full dominant 7 caged arpeggio. Some practical exercises we can do with the arpeggios, and again, I'm going to show them to you in a second. The reversed version, alternate version, exercise applied to the caged arpeggio. Group of 3, group of 4. From scale to arpeggio, so alternating scale and arpeggio, literally is in the name. From chord number 1 to chord number 5. And some sort of recap exercises, since so far we've studied Ionian, Dorian, and Mixolydian, moving from one to the other. Let's start from the top. So first of all, we're looking at the scale itself. I'm going to do it in the key of G. So if this is G7 as a chord, here is my scale. And of course, it strictly resembles C Ionian in the same position. So this is C Ionian, and the scale looks exactly the same. And we've done this particular finger shape in lesson 4. So all the exercises, seconds, thirds, fourths, all the interval studies that we've done for lesson 4, they still apply to the scale, even if in this case we're applying it to a Mixolydian sound. Fourths. Or what's different is, of course, when we did C Ionian, we did this kind of arpeggio that highlights the chord, right? Now we're in the same area, same cage, since this is mainly the cage system, and we're dealing with G, so the arpeggios are different. Here is your dominant 7 arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. And we know, because we studied in lesson 16 a bit of harmony and theory, that the extensions for Mixolydian are 9, 11, and 13. As usual, we can practice these arpeggios like I highlighted in the PDF. So let's take, like, for example, just dominant 7. I'm not going to start here, obviously, to practice this arpeggio. I'm going to start playing the lower part of the neck, and if I start here, this is B. So this is B7. C7, C sharp, D, E flat, E, F, and so forth and so on. Then there is the reversed version, so it starts from the flat 7, 5, 3, 1, and we are simply going, let's see, D, and all the way up and all the way down, right? And then there is the alternated version where we ascend, so 1, 3, 5, flat 7, then we move it chromatically, we descend, so B, C, C sharp, D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. We've seen this way of practicing before. I mean, since lesson 1, I suggest you practice arpeggios this way. And the reversed version is because, in a way, most of the time, if you're soloing, you're operating on the upper strings, and more likely you're moving backwards. So, like, say, if we are in A, you better know this. Sorry, in G. That's G7. So also, like, for your photographic memory, it's good not to see the arpeggios and the scales. Always, having as a reference lower notes. But it's also good to have it with the upper notes. Scale, same thing. You can practice, as I said, with the intervals, or simply, like, if you need to refresh it, again, you can take the shape and start from, say this is C7, C sharp 7, D7, E flat 7, and of course you could do it in group 3, group 4. As I said, you find all possible exercises you can do on this scale in the PDF associated with lesson 4. One thing that can be interesting in your practice is to use different rhythmic composition when it comes to practicing the arpeggios. Of course, I give for granted that you practice with the metronome. So I'll give you an example. Let's see if I can start it. So let's say, for example, that I have 8 notes. I want to play in 8 notes. So I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And this is this composition in 8 notes. If it helps, you could see this as a 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So this is basically playing in 8 notes, right? But also you could try and do the same, but this time playing triplets. So 8 notes triplets. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you have this. 8 notes, triplets. 8 notes, triplets, 8 notes, triplets, so as you can see, this can, train you also in terms of moving from one rhythmic composition to another. And of course, you can apply this kind of exercise to all the arpeggios. So let's say, for example, let's take a dominant 9. So a 7-9 arpeggio. Same thing. So 8 notes. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is D9, E flat 9. Or with triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is B. Okay? In a way, like, it's pointless at this point that I go through the entire PDF with all the exercises. Basically, the logic behind them is the same as the previous lesson and the previous lesson and the previous lesson. So I'd rather show you some extra stuff you can do compared to just the PDFs. In fact, in the PDF, you have an exercise called Group of 3, Group of 4. And what that is basically taking the caged arpeggio. Again, if I am in G, it will be this. This contains all the notes of, of the dominant 7 arpeggio, but starting from the 5th as opposed to the root. So it's 5th, flat 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And that's also something you want to practice chromatically like every other arpeggio. So that's C, C sharp, D, E flat, E, and so forth and so on. As you can see, it's still the shape. So it's my A shape moving around, and this time is in E, and this is the arpeggio that goes with that. And this is the scale that goes with it. As you can see, the concept in a way is quite simple, so I'm just transposing it around. So in the PDF, you have this exercise, Group of 3, where we are fragmenting this particular arpeggio in small chunks. This is basically 3 notes at a time, or 4 notes at a time. But something else you can do, for example, is to apply the same approach, so Group of 3 and Group of 4, to the modal arpeggio. And what the modal arpeggio is basically a dominant 7 arpeggio with all the extensions. Again, if we go back to the key of G, 1, 3, 5, so I'm starting from the root note, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. So this would be the modal arpeggio, contains all the notes, the vertical structure of the arpeggio. And I can do it in Group of 3. Okay, then again, we can practice it in 8 notes or in triplets. But maybe I'll do it in the key of C. I'll start from C. C sharp. That's D. And I can do the same Group of 4. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 5, 9, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. If I want to add the extra octave, I I'm going out, okay, H here is a C note, right? If you want to kind of close the circle. And again, as an exercise, group of 4, C sharp, D, E flat, E, etc. So without going into too much details about the rest of the PDF, as I mentioned, we've looked at these things before. So I'm going to show you in a second the 2 octaves one. The rest is simply like the PDF is self-explanatory, and if you need a demonstration of it, I mean, all the previous lessons are approached this way. Just make sure, especially here, that you practice the Ionian to Dorian to Mixolydian as an arpeggio and as a scale, so that your ears are training to the differences. What that means, again, we are here. In this case, we're looking at G. First G Ionian, then G Dorian, and now G Mixolydian. So if I look at G Ionian, so G major if you want to, again, it's a shape. I could do the same. This is now is D, okay? Don't forget that, it's a shape. Anyway, this is, I'm at fret 10, so this is G Ionian, and this is scale that goes with it. Right? And this is the arpeggio. For minor, we add or minor 7, or minor 7. And this is Dorian. And this is the arpeggio. Now we're starting dominant 7. That's my scale. That's my arpeggio. Okay. Let's move on, and the second PDF concerns that chords. As usual, I added a few chord shapes that you can use. Again, so very self-explanatory. I'm going to show you a few shapes in a second, but, you know, in a way, fairly simple. Just don't forget that whenever you see a white note, that means that you're not playing it. Basically, in this case, you're playing 3, flat 7, 9, and 5. This is for your visual reference. Okay. And oops. And again, you have a few shapes you can use. So let's start from the typical G7. That's a G9. That's with the 13, which is up here. This is one of those that omits the root note. These are all G7 chords. If you remember the previous lesson, this was your C shape. So now this is the following one. And you can practice them again with a metronome, with rhythm, or you can even think of finger picking it. That's without the root note. 5th on top. And of course they all come from this. And fairly easy. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of all about looking at them, practicing them, and some of them will stick in terms of photographic memory and muscle memory. Again, have a look at the PDF. I'm going to show it to you in case you want to stop the video and, have a look. By stop, I mean pause the video. Well, as usual, all these things, I mean, the PDFs are available in my Patreon page. So, of course, if you want to support this project, would be much appreciated. Just visit my Patreon page, see what's the tier that, you can afford the most. It starts at basically $3 a month. as a support, and which I think is totally worth it. And there is backing tracks available to advanced Patron supporters. So like, I think it's $8 or $9 a month. And you have access to a whole load of backing tracks you can use for practice. And of course you have access to all the previous lessons. Before we close this lesson, one thing we can start doing is starting to kind of recap what we've done Mixolydian wise. Before, next lesson is going to be the last one regarding Mixolydian. So we can start kind of connecting the 4 shapes we've done so far. So again, I'm going to stay in the key of G. We've done G7 in the shape of E7. Again, the concept is the same. E major, E7, and then I transposed it. Oops. So we have G7, and then we can recap by reminding ourselves the scale that goes with it. So G Mixolydian and the arpeggio. That's a G7 arpeggio. You can of course try the other ones. That's a G9, for example. But as I said, start at least with chords, basic chord, big chord like this, scale, arpeggio. So you can make sure that you remember what we've done so far. Then you have G7 in the shape of D7. So we have D open chord, D7 transposed. Now we have our G7 and our scale and our arpeggio. Then we've done our, again, G7 in the shape of C7. So we had C major, C7, we transposed it, now we're in G again. Okay? And that's our scale. Our arpeggio. So now we have G7, 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 and the last one we've done so far, G7. And of course you can think of it as connecting all the scale. This is all G Mixolydian. Or the arpeggio. Arpeggio. And next time we're going to do the last of the shapes. Again, chords you can think connecting. There is all a bunch of things you can do, but the idea is start reconnecting all the 4 shapes we've done so far, so that, by the time we get to the 5th, you have an entire idea about the guitar in terms of the entire neck. Of course, you don't have to do everything in G. As I say, when I play this shape, what I'm thinking of in terms of, okay, that's G, is the root note, which is right here. For me, at least that's the way I see it. It could be this one for you. When I see this, that's my root note. When I see this, here is my root note. And when I see this, is the same root note. So let's do this in C, for example. If I was to do this in C starting down here, of course, this is C7. The shape we've done in our last lesson. This is C7, and this is the shape we've done this week. This is going to be our next shape, so the shape of G. And here is my C7 shape of E, C7 shape of D, C7 shape of C, C7 shape of A. So the concept is still the same. So here is my scale. That's my arpeggio. So you want to change key every day so you don't get used to, just the key of G. Tomorrow you do E flat. One last thing before I close this lesson. Again, if you're an advanced Patron, you might want to use one of the backing track for dominant 7, the one which has only 1 chord, and so that you can kind of use it as a recap. So basically what I just did with music. I'm going to load it up in a second and show it to you how I would do it. You don't have to do it the same way. And of course, again, you can change key every day. There is 12 backing tracks and they're all in different keys. So today you practice G, tomorrow you practice, I don't know, E flat. And you can use it to practice all of it, arpeggio, chords, and scales. And as you know, that's how I see it. To me, it's three sides of the same thing. You know, if I think G7, I might play a G7 chord if I'm the guy comping, or I might use scales and arpeggios if I'm the guy soloing. But to me, it's the same thing. I'm just thinking G7. Okay, let's load the backing track. I'm going to show it to you, and then we'll come back and I'll, talk just a little bit more before the end of this lesson. And this is it for lesson 32. I hope you enjoyed it. If anything, I hope it makes sense, that it's logical enough. As you noticed, this time I didn't go through the entire PDF as I usually do in the other lessons. But just because I think by now, for those of you that kind of followed this from the beginning or, before this particular lesson, you kind of probably understood the way things needs to be done, and the PDF is kind of self-explanatory. So in this case, I wanted to show you a couple of things, 2-3 things that actually were not on the PDF. So, you can be creative with what you get. So anything which is in the PDF is still kind of expandable, so I gave you just a couple of examples on how that can be done. Again, if something is not clear, simply, drop a comment or, send me a message and I'll try and explain it to you. At the same time, of course, it would be nice if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's always nice and appreciated. And of course, if you want to support this project more substantially, you can always become a Patreon. All the links to this stuff is going to be on the video description. And of course, you can donate if you want. As I said, it's great to bring this project forward, and you can do with your help if you can afford it. As I say, the minimum is $3 a month, and you have access to all the PDFs for these lessons and the future one. So have a think about it. In the meanwhile, I hope you guys are doing great out there. And until next time, thank you very much. Bye.